A huge thanks to the organizers of this conference for inviting me, and a particular thanks to Martin Schlag. And he said to me, the reason I'm inviting you, he said, is that unlike many who will be in the audience, you deal in practicalities, not in theories. But I feel a little bit like the lowest possible soldier in an army who's been brought back from the front line to address you generals and field marshals. Because the level of erudition, as we heard in the last speech, by the way, I've never heard somebody read a text so quickly as that. If you had the privilege, like me, of listening to translation, the translator couldn't keep up with it. However, can I say, it's a very great pleasure to be here. When I started thinking about what to say today, I suddenly realized that from a technological point of view, I feel my address is Jurassic Park. So I thought I must invite someone who knows something about technology and artificial intelligence. And 2 years ago, I had the great privilege of chairing a session that Maria Chiara Carosa did in Windsor Castle at a conference which we were holding over a weekend. She's a great authority. I rang her up and she said she'd be delighted to speak at this conference, so we are sharing this session together. So Maria Chiara, it's wonderful to have you here. Because she's also a member, unlike me, I'm not elected, but she's an elected member of the Italian Parliament and was formerly Secretary of Education. Perhaps I can give you just, I'm told I have 15 minutes. So what you'll have today is a tasting menu, not a proper meal. Just a little background. For the first decade of my career, I taught in the economics department at the London School of Economics. And the perspective of business was very much the standard theory of the firm in neoclassical economics. Firms maximize profits. Subject to market structures, you get different prices and outcomes. In this approach, there were no ethical considerations. So I thought to myself, I really want to understand how business works. And the place to go, therefore, is to a business school. So for the next decade, I was at City University Business School, now Cass Business School, to better understand how business made decisions. I then went into government for 5.5 years, and on coming out in the first week, I was offered jobs I suddenly realized there was no money coming in. I was offered jobs by 2 American banks, one of which was Goldman Sachs, and for the last 26 years, I've been an international advisor there. Shortly after the financial crisis, they asked me if I would write a report on how Goldman Sachs should be governed in London. In particular, Goldman Sachs International, the broker-dealer. I did the report, and it was accepted in its entirety. And for the last 8-9 years, I've been a director of Goldman Sachs International and Goldman Sachs International Bank. I've also, in this time, sat on the boards of about at least a dozen companies. One floated on the New York Stock Exchange, another the London Stock Exchange, another NASDAQ, private equity firms, subsidiary operations of larger companies. I've never been a full-time executive, particularly in the earlier part of my career, in any business. And so the insights that I have are really from a non-executive position, but I can honestly say, seeing Goldman Sachs as my base in London, I probably am the nearest non-executive to an executive that you could ever get. And what I'd like to do today is really to, if I can put it in a sentence, it's the following. I believe that the Christian faith is relevant to the whole of life, and not just relevant in a sort of casual sense or in a superficial sense, but relevant in an absolutely fundamental sense. And if I've learned one lesson from being in business, it is that the Christian faith is not just relevant to a question, what is the social responsibility of business? But the Christian faith is relevant to the very heart of business, which is how decisions are made and the purpose of business itself. And as a result, I'd like to talk briefly about three things. One is the purpose of business. A second is the work-life balance. And the third is the issue of culture, conduct, and reputational risk in business. In terms of the purpose of business, many people think that the purpose of business is to maximize profits or to maximize shareholder value. If the purpose of business is that, then that purpose will influence its character and culture, its principles and values, the way it does business, the way it treats people, and the environment, its responsibilities to the community in which it's located. Profit is important, but at its heart, a business must have a purpose greater than profit. Profit, therefore, I see as a means to an end, not an end in itself. Profit is, after all, simply the reward for people who have invested in the business, taking complete risk, so that if the business becomes insolvent and goes bust, they lose all their money. Those people need to be compensated, therefore profit is really fundamental. But I really began to understand the importance of purpose in business as a result of being a board member of two companies in America, one a company called Herman Miller and the other a company called ServiceMaster. Herman Miller is a company of about 2 billion turnover. It produces office furniture. It was the design leader in the 20th century. It had great designers such as Charles Eames, George Nelson, Alexander Girard, Noguchi, and many of its products are in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It developed the first open plan office because of an understanding of community, and it was really a very interesting company to be on the board of. I was on the board of it for 21 years. It came out of a Dutch Reform background, and so one traveled every quarter to board meetings in Western Michigan, where the headquarters was in Zeeland. The board meetings were held in Holland, and there was a saying, in that part of the world, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much. I'd like to now read something. It's a long quotation from a man who is a theological professor at the University of Yale, Nicholas Waltersdorf. This is what he says. About 10 years ago, I served quite amazingly as a philosophical consultant to the Herman Miller Company in Zeeland, Michigan. Max Dupree, the executive officer of the company, had invited an architect, a physician, a journalist, a furniture designer, a theologian, and me to an all-day session with him and about 5 of the top officers in his company. At the beginning of the day, he posed 10 questions that he wanted us to discuss in whatsoever order we wished. He asked us not to concern ourselves with trying to say things that we thought would be useful to the company. He wanted the discussion to take whatever shape it wanted to take. I remember 3 of the questions. What is the purpose of business, he asked. Some of his younger executives were saying that the purpose of business was to make money. He himself didn't believe that, but he wanted to talk about it. as he called it, second, he wondered whether there was a moral imperative, as he called it, for companies to produce products of good design. And third, he wanted to discuss whether it was possible to preserve what he called intimacy in a large company. It became clear in the course of the discussion what Dupree himself regarded as the purpose of business. The purpose, as he saw it, was twofold: to produce products that serve a genuine need and are aesthetically good, and to provide meaningful work in pleasant surroundings for those employed in the company. Now, it seems to me, Waltersdorf says, that these two purposes are or can be an expression of charity. That is, both consist in concern to promote the welfare of the other. As a matter of fact, it became clear in the course of the discussion that it was Dupree's religious commitment, specifically his Christian commitment, that had led him to embrace these goals. He saw his operation of the company as an exercise of charity, though he didn't use that word. His own case, at least as he presented it, was a case of transcendental faith shaping economic activity. The other company, which I was on the board of for 15 years, was a company called ServiceMaster. The name was, it was in the service business. It's a $5 to $6 billion turnover. And the term ServiceMaster was chosen, masters of service serving the master. It had 4 corporate objectives: to honor God in all we do, to help people develop, to pursue excellence, to grow profitably. Harvard Business School took quite an interest in the company, and our chairman and chief executive gave many talks to MBA students about the company. The first question always was, why do you need the first objective? And this is what he said: the first objective is meant to provide a starting point for all of us, not to convey a religious point of view. In combination with this, second, it guides us by suggesting ways in which we treat people. The last 2 objectives not only provide the means for achieving the first 2, they keep us in balance and provide a kind of creative tension for the management. I believe that you cannot really think about the purpose of business without thinking about a worldview. And from a Christian perspective, therefore, when we think about business, I mean, the very raison d'etre of what we are doing, you cannot think of that ultimately outside of a theological and anthropological framework, which is what the Christian faith is really all about. The second, I'm clearly not going to have enough time to finish what I have to say. The second issue is the issue of vocation and the work-life balance. I think it's clear, it's very evident, at least in the UK, I can't speak for other countries, but the pressure of an increasingly demanding work culture is considered by people in the mental health profession as being one of the most serious and most pressing challenges that we have. It's partly because of the effects of the competitiveness arising from globalization, technological change, deregulation, and the reduction in the power of trade unions. Occasionally, and the whole issue of the work-life balance has been something that management have had to devote an increasing amount of attention to, whether in terms of introducing more flexible working options, ensuring that the line manager supports the person with the problem, both of which turn out to be important factors. However, occasionally, you really have a wake-up call. In the City of London, I would say that most people connected with banking, accounting, law, and ancillary services work extremely long hours. I mean, it's typical for people to work from 9:30 in the morning, until very late at night. The wake-up call came a few years ago in August 2013 when a 21-year-old intern at Merrill Lynch, after allegedly working until 6 a.m. for 3 consecutive nights, died. It isn't clear whether the hours worked were the cause of death, but it was a wake-up call for the banks. And all of them introduced limits restricting the hours that interns should work. I mention this because it seems to me that we really have a problem in the Western world at present with the competitiveness that we have and the demands that that's making on people. And you feel, given the nature of the problem, because the problem itself is so large, that in a way we're only putting sticking plaster in trying to sort it out. And that's why a Christian perspective, which starts with human beings created in the image of God, with the creation mandate, which all of us are involved in, with the notion of vocation, that this is getting to the fundamental heart of the problem. And the answer is not, in a way, platitudes. The answer has to be very grounded and specific. And I think that, in Hebrew, I'm told avodah is both work and worship. And hence, the challenge in business is really trying to figure out how this Christian view of the human person fits into a company. My time is really gone, but in terms of the third item I wanted to raise, so much has been done, I think, since the financial crisis in business, in thinking about standards, dealing with conflicts which arise and so on. And I'll just give you one example, if I may. Traditionally, in the whole of business, but especially, I would say, in investment banking, the assumption was that the rule in dealing with a client was caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. That was the nature of the way business was conducted. Today, one of the most fundamental tests, certainly that we emphasize in our bank, but I think you'll find that all banks have moved to this position, not least because the regulators have also become excited by it, is the test of can we, should be. Can we do this piece of business? Is it legal to do this piece of business? Does it make commercial sense to do this piece of business? But in addition to that, should we do this piece of business? Is this piece of business the right thing to be doing? And that, I think, is a very, very important question to be asked. I wanted to discuss conflicts of interest. I wanted also to discuss whistleblowing. Whistleblowing, if I can just give 1 minute on it, I've been responsible as chairman of the audit committee in Goldman Sachs for whistleblowing. And one thing that really struck me, which was mentioned by Professor Zimmerman yesterday, and I was going to quote it, but I'll just say it. Whistleblowing is something very difficult. It's very interesting that the whistleblower in Enron, Sharon Watkins, and the whistleblower in HBOS and Lloyds Bank in London were both Christians. And whistleblowing involves a huge risk. And reading Bonhoeffer's book on ethics, I was struck by what Professor Zimmerman read out yesterday, because Bonhoeffer says, to who am I responsible as a doctor? If I'm at the bed of a patient, I'm clearly responsible for the patient. but what is my responsibility to my profession? What is my responsibility to the country? And I thought to myself, in terms of banking, and you see it you see it in many places. I'm just finishing. That sense of who you actually include as your sense of the area of responsibility is really very important. So let me conclude the last few sentences. As I started, I think the Christian faith is relevant to the whole of life, and it's relevant to the workplace. It's very clear, as you open the daily paper, that there's a deficit of ethics in the workplace. I think being a Christian is not just about the social responsibility of business. It's not just about the annual carol service. It's not even about evangelizing within the workplace. At present, the Christian group in Goldman Sachs has lunchtime lectures and apologetics. It's not about encouraging charitable giving. It's relevant to the heart of work itself. And this was the vision of José María Escrivá. And I believe these challenges in the workplace can only be met by lay Christians, but lay Christians who are theologically and biblically informed, striving to relate their faith to their work, not in an ostentatious, overbearing manner, but in humility, responding to the example of Jesus in serving others. This, my friends, is a great vision, and the reason I think this conference is so important. Thank you.